Welcome to Career Pod, your Audible career fair podcast. I'm your host, Dana Francis.
Insulation. It may not be something you think of every day, but up here in Canada, it's the thing that helps keep us warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Much like our homes, industrial plants, in order to run efficiently, need to be well insulated, and with all the green initiatives that have been popping up in the construction industry, I feel like this career path is one everyone should be paying attention to. As a Heat and Frost Insulator, our guest this week, Adam Melnick, found himself in this career quite by accident. Adam was such a pleasure to have on the show. I am happy our previous guest, Jamie McMillan from Kickass Careers, insisted that I reach out to Adam because I had so much fun interviewing him. As trades workers, there's always a healthy amount of bantering amongst one another, so for sure in this episode, we poke a joke or two. I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Today we have Adam Melnick on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. First podcast guesting time ever.
Yay! It must feel weird to be on the opposite end of the when you're interviewing so many different people for your podcast.
I feel like it's easier because I know that the all the work that comes after this episode is not me. It's unfortunately it's you, but thank you for doing it.
So I know you like to do a lot of advocacy for trades, but can you tell us a little about the trade you already have under your belt as a insulator and how you got into that profession?
Sure, yeah. I'm a Heat and Frost Insulator. I'm sure all your listeners know exactly what that is. For the two of you who do, thank you. Most of you probably have no clue, and that's cool. Mechanical insulation goes on pipes, ducts, boilers, and that kind of stuff. How I got into the trade was while I was busy pursuing my pathway of a professional wrestler while working part-time jobs, which I was not good at either of those things. My wife was at a baby shower, and I don't know what possessed her that day, but she decided to tell some folks what I was trying to become in the professional wrestler thing. And they had like an intervention kind of thing happen there. And all of a sudden she comes home from the baby shower and I'm told I'm an insulator. I didn't really like that in the sense that skilled trades were like the last thing in the world I wanted to do. I felt like doing it was a failure. But anyways, I went and did it because I knew I wasn't really going anywhere else. And it's not the world's best entrance story into a skilled trade. It definitely made it a little hard. But once I got into the trade and got exposed to the world of opportunity that comes out of the trade, then it slowly changed. I'm not going to say that happened quickly, but it did happen. And as you put the time on the trade and you start to learn, then that was a neat thing. It took off. But what a weird entrance. It was definitely not your traditional search out a trade and apply.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily this generation, but I know my generation, and I was kind of in high school throughout the 90s. It kind of felt like trades was something you did if you weren't going to university or if you weren't going to college. And it wasn't at the top of the pyramid. It's like it was kind of like the second choice or the third choice. It was never presented as a first choice option. So...
Oh, you're fortunate then in your world where it was even on the pyramid. I don't think mine was even a discussion. Where I was a small town, and it really was a university dominated school I went to. College was, I know folks went to college, but it was very small amount of people went to college. And then there was like, if you were going to be a skilled trade or a work from high school kind of person, I felt like it was pointed out very early on that you would be that person, and they just kind of gave up on you. And I know I'm stereotyping, and I'm sure there'll be people that I went to school with or before or after me that will tell a different story. But as a general view, like looking at a person who was earmarked to go to university and basically everyone thought that's what you would do, that was definitely the view I had. And I know a lot of my friends had and have shared openly over the years. And yeah, and again, you're right. I went to high school in the 90s too, same generation, I think. And it was definitely a non-starting point. It was maybe after all other options were exhausted, maybe it would be a conversation. So
wasn't idolized the way it is now. Like back when I was 18, I would have been ashamed to have gone into the trades. I say that now, but that's just looking back at, young, dumb teenager version of me. But now in my 30s, I'm so proud to have a journeyman ticket under my belt. Like it's a source of pride, and it feels like an accomplishment. And I don't know if I would have appreciated the same back when I was younger.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with the word accomplishment. And it's one of the things that is least talked about is it maybe now it's a little more popular, but certainly when I got into my trade, it wasn't something that's shared with me openly, which I kind of wish it was. That, you know, you're taking on something major. Like, this isn't just you go to work. Like, this is a 4 to 5 year plan. It has schooling. It has educational components that you can fail at. You have to learn. It isn't a free pass. By the way, people are going to be really hard with you on it because you're going to make good money while you do it. Like, all those intangibles that you successfully navigate as you go through your apprenticeship and then become a qualified journey person in whatever trade you're in. That sense of accomplishment at the end of that road is amazing. I'm sure people who have gathered their BA, or their, you know, maybe their master's, PhD, or whatever their educational accomplishments have been, I'm sure they wear that with a badge of honor. But I really feel like people who accomplish an apprenticeship can maybe wear it with a little greater pride, because there are certainly things you navigate through an apprenticeship that are not necessarily that comparable to post-secondary. So it's a huge badge of honor. And for a lot of people, I think if you knew more in depth about that conversation from early on, they might be more enticed to want to go venture down that pathway because they like the challenges. They like the idea of operating outside of the grain. They love to learn, but they hate sitting in class. Like, they hate sitting in school, but they still are, they're astute. They want to learn. They're inquisitive. They're innovative. And, you know, you're making me think, this makes me think of a phrase I really, really hate. Skilled tradespeople, they like what they work with their hands. I hate that phrase. I can't stand that phrase. It drives me nuts.
But we do.
I do. But we like to work with our hands because our brains are so overloaded. We have to transfer it to our hands. And I always like to think about it that way, because if you think about the incredible amount of thought process and tactile, like, problem solving you've got going on the whole time you're working with your hands, it almost becomes second nature because you went through your apprenticeship and you don't realize it. But take your task that you're doing as a journey person or even an apprentice, take someone with no trade background, no trade experience, and put it in their hands and watch the stress, watch them panic. And why are you confident? Because you've got the knowledge, training, and you're processing all this content through your brain at the same time while you're doing it. That doesn't come easy. And it's not just because you like to work with your hands. It's because you're cognitively capable to do both. And so I always like to try to compare both together. Like, it's got to be a happy harmony between your brain and your hands. It can't be just your hands.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people that, you know, maybe they don't take the college or university path, I think you can kind of tell that they should at the very least be considering the trades. Because I know me, I was in construction retail, but it's like I had to kind of switch from a job here to a job there just because I would grow bored. That just didn't excite me enough. I wasn't using enough of my brain. So that's when it was a perfect fit for me for when I got into the trades, because I was like, oh, awesome. I get to be physically active and I get to use my brain at the same time. Like, it's definitely a happy melody of them. You've already kind of been chatting to this, but what type of education, knowledge, or experience would you need to pursue a career in insulation?
So Heat and Frost Insulators, you know, a high school diploma is always going to be helpful. I think there's still an opportunity in Ontario that if you didn't have your high school diploma, you could still practice, get into this apprenticeship. I'm not an advocate of that, and simply because that I taught the trade school in the province here for, I would say, just over 8 years, give or take. And I know that the curriculum is pretty heavy on things like thermodynamics and geometry, and there's a little bit of algebra, which when I say that to people, they go, what, algebra? And I'm like, well, yeah, like formulas and equations and stuff, and which, you know, kind of touches on algebra. And they go, oh yeah, I forget that's algebra. But yeah, we get into the maths, some of the sciences. Geez, I'm a big pusher on people actually having good communication skills. It's something we're noticing as a big gap right now in all skill trades, including my own, is the ability to communicate is definitely disappearing. I mean, we can blame it on social media and cell phones and what have you, but you know, we have a generation that is very comfortable with texting and emailing, working with a generation that, as you know, current supervisors and leaders in their industry are used to phone calls and face-to-face. So we definitely have to work on bridging that conversation piece. So I always say to people, like, how was your English grade? And, did you take it all the way through? And how did you do? How'd you do in your oral presentations and stuff? And I know you can hate it, but can you just articulate your point? That's super helpful on a construction site, because if we can't get a message from one person to another cleanly, you can have some serious disasters.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge safety concern, especially when there's so many people that, at least here in Alberta, I've worked with people from all over the world. So it can be difficult sometimes because language can be a barrier, because English is not always the first language. But then even people that English is their first language, it's not necessarily. I know there's been plenty of situations. I actually keep like a little notebook. Well, I started at the beginning of my apprenticeship to keep a notebook of just all the things I was doing, because I found was a very good way of, when my foreman would give me information, I'd be like, okay, this is what I got to do today. And I'm writing it down and I'm just reconfirming it with you.
But what's interesting though, is that you said some really key things there that I really want to point out that I think are awesome. Like, you go through high school and you're either decent at taking notes or maybe poor at taking notes, or, however, but for a lot of people that get into maybe skilled trade careers, no matter what they are, construction or any of the other sectors of skilled trades, but one of the best skills you can have is note taking. And, instantly the original correlation would be someone who's academic takes good notes and they're going to be going to university. Well, quite frankly, the best note taker is going to do really good in a skilled trade, because quite frankly, it's 5 minutes of direction, if you're lucky, for a day to sometimes multiple days of activity that you have to do. So the amount of content you have to pull out of that instruction on your notes for what you need to do for the next however many hours or steps, it's huge. It's super important. And that's again another skill that's slightly, we go back on the skills for my trade or any trade, the ability to take apart information and to track it for moving forward. I mean, that note-taking ability is huge.
Yeah, especially now with all the safety paperwork, sometimes I feel like that's, 25% of my job is just writing out FLHAs or hazard IDs. And it's just, it's gotten a lot more, you got to know how to write. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, you got your safety pieces. And then don't forget, like, we start getting into the whole quality control aspect now too, right? So the documentation on processes and what you're doing inside that trade or in that task, you got to write all this stuff down, and you got to write it so someone else can read it later and, ready for this, understand it.
I think we've all come across that one person on the crew that it's like, what is this?
Oh, I'm the worst. Mine would fill up so much I would get in trouble and not be allowed to write them anymore. So someone else would have to do it.
Could you kind of step us through what a day at work might look like for you when you're on an insulating job?
Well, yeah, we as an insulator, I mean, there's a lot of different sites you could be on. I mean, you can be in a commercial environment, an industrial environment, but I think most correlate the same way. It like any other construction site, you gather yourself together, get your pre-job or your safety briefing, or your basically like what we're going to do today, things of note for the day, get yourselves organized into your crews, and you go off to your task and you begin your process of insulate. And for insulators, I mean, we can be in ceilings, we could be going up walls, pipe chases up walls around, because the majority of the work that we are insulating are usually things that are kind of out of the way. So the mechanical systems or the guts of a building, essentially, running through the boiler systems and the air supply systems, they're usually tucked up out of the way. So after they've been installed and everything else starts getting built around them, we kind of have to chase behind and get that insulation on them for their efficiency and to provide, adequate, for the system to work adequately or efficiently for that matter. So we end up having to chase that around. So we find ourselves accessing things, how can I put it? You better like heights and small spaces, because you do have to chase into those environments after they start getting built and defined. So you could end up spending most of your day in a lift. You can be up on scaffold for the majority of the day. Unfortunately, we work on ladders still, as much as so much height training comes into play and trying to keep ourselves off ladders. It's tough because our material is extremely light and small hand application. So we still, unfortunately, utilize a ladder way too often. But also then you get underground, small spaces, confined spaces, some really interesting tight environments. And it's really, you can be in a world where it's new application. So it's a new building, it's a new structure, it's a new boiler system, a new gas plant, and you're going in and putting insulation on brand new systems. Or we're going in environments where we're taking insulation off systems. So other trades, like your trade as a steam fitter or a pipe fitter, could come in and make their necessary changes to their valves or piping systems and then replace the equipment. And then we go back down and join up old insulation systems to new insulation systems. So you end up with a real caveat of environments. And we as a trade, I find on a lot of sites, can bounce around the site quite a bit, where, maybe we're removing insulation for some people to get to whatever task they're trying to do. And meanwhile, we're still applying new insulation on, new systems that were done previously. So we find ourselves sometimes spread pretty all over the site.
I was going to say, I kind of feel like my trade sometimes can be a bit of your guys' worst nightmare because it's just...
I wasn't going to say it because you're the host, but yep.
Oh, I just feel like I used to do glycol heat tracing when I first started off in my apprenticeship. And that's some tight spaces, but then you got to go in after me and then insulate on top of all that. I'm like, it's already a tight space when I'm in there. So I was like, I can only imagine what it is for some of these bigger trades boys.
Yeah, and the insulation just takes up space as well, right? And then unfortunately, insulation doesn't service very well after you step, layer, or squish it. So it needs to be put on and then left alone, which is even harder because you have to really learn to get in some spaces where not only is it difficult to get to, you've got to get to the furthest part of that space, work your way out so you don't wreck your own system, and taking in these 3-foot sections of pipe covering of whatever size or material they're made of, dragging them, 150 feet down a crawl space, putting them on, and then making it still work and get out. Because putting this on is not like wrapping a Christmas present or whatever the case I've heard descriptors used over the years. If the system isn't interlocked correctly and the vapor barrier is sealed, in some cases don't even bother doing it. And so it can be hugely detrimental if you don't do it right, because the system could, end up having a lot of humidity or, heat. Thermodynamics and heat, they like to work with the path of least resistance. So if you're not insulating it correctly, the heat or steam or moisture will move to the gap in the insulation and then, deposit itself there. So, 200-degree steam line could actually, at an open spot on insulation, be like 240 degrees or 230 degrees, which doesn't sound crazy, but we're talking about some pretty high temperatures here. Mm-hmm. So it becomes incredibly dangerous. And vice versa with cold lines or cryogenic lines. All of a sudden the ice starts to build up. People see it everywhere with like propane tanks and stuff that aren't dealt with properly on outside of hospitals, and the whole thing's covered in ice on a nice summer day. That's incredibly not efficient and dangerous, because now the pipes are being jeopardized by pressure of ice and condensation and that. But a properly insulated system, and that wouldn't happen at all. So the job does have to be done right. It can't just be tossed on. So yeah, when tracing goes on before us, we love that, because it's always perfectly straight and in line. And the other thing that I love about fitters, and I love you all for it, by the way, there's a hole in the wall. The pipe should be in the center of the hole, eh?
It's funny because actually all throughout my apprenticeship, I didn't do a lot of fitting. Like most of what I was doing was bolt up and glycol heat tracing and a lot of hydrostatic testing.
Okay, yeah.
As a fitter, I don't have a really broad range of experience fitting, which is kind of funny. And I kind of did a lot of QC stuff too. So walking through lines and checking to make sure that things were good. But yeah,
that's cool.
People always kind of think of certain trades and they think of the one aspect of it that people relate to it. And with fitting, obviously fitting is that aspect, but there's just so many different nuances and little crannies here and there that you can kind of venture off to that. Yeah.
Well, that's construction in a nutshell though. You hit a wonderful one there. A conversation I share with a lot of folks is they talk about apprenticeship and someone getting their journey person's ticket or their CFQ or red seal, whatever the finish line looks like for that trade. And they like, yeah, you accomplished it. And then I look at them and I say, what, you think that's it?
Because hell no.
The door you just opened up was bigger than anything you ever thought of before. It's insane. And the amount of career opportunities after a trade ticket, I often think completely dwarfs your ability of what you could do with a BA from a university program. I think they're not, quite frankly, I think you're a little more specialized with your BA versus what you're capable of doing with your trade ticket.
My favorite journeyman, his one of the things he liked to say was, your journeyman ticket isn't, it's like your driver's license. Like, yeah, you got it, but you got to actually learn how to drive now. It's like, you managed to pass the test, but the real test is, you know, the next 5 years down the line, the next 15 years down the line.
That is great advice. Yeah, big time, big time.
So would you say that there's much competition for this work? Like, what does the job forecast look like for the future?
For insulators, it's quite high. We've become popular. And the reason we've become popular is not because of marketing or branding or anything. In fact, it's because people need to be way more environmentally efficient. Carbon tax is a thing, and reducing carbon emissions or GHG emissions is huge, right? Like, this is the biggest trend in construction going right now. And the faucets and toilets and light bulbs and windows kind of already been kind of done. Like, a lot of it's been done or is in the process of being complete as these big initiatives. The next big initiative is breaking down to the one thing that I think everyone's hesitant on and lifting up the ceiling tiles and cutting down some drywall and realizing that the pipes behind the walls are either inadequately insulated or not insulated at all. And to reduce the amount of wastewater, to reduce the amount of gas and oil and what have you, electricity consumed to run all the systems inside, you know, existing commercial properties and further new developments, those systems need to be insulated, and they need to be done to maintain, you know, more efficient and consistent temperatures. So we've become extremely popular. Initiatives are happening all across, I know, Ontario right now. Some of our employers have partnered up with some of the energy providers to create incentive programs for new insulation systems. Energy auditing is becoming a huge thing to go through and analyze energy waste. And the number one solution to, you know, wasteful energy inside of a facility is putting in properly insulated systems. So we've become a really popular trade right now. On top of that, it has to be done effectively. Like, to do the system correctly, you have to understand how it works, why it works, and what to use. So the trade has gotten a lot of, I guess, press is a better term right now. So it's interesting for us. Ontario's very busy. I can speak to Ontario's landscape right now. We're very busy for our heat and frost insulator trade. We're definitely in demand. In my current job as a union rep and traveling around the province, I'll tell you that the demand isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's definitely on the rise. And as construction continues to finally come out of our low turn and into a high swing, it's going to keep that way for a while. And the beauty thing of an insulator is that we follow pipe trades and sheet metal and other trades. So often when they're still rising and peaking, we know we're still going to follow that for a while. You know, often on a job site, we're there for months or sometimes even it could be a year or so longer than the mechanical trades while we're insulating the systems. So just when their downturn starts to swing, we know we still have time before our downturn hits. So that tends to help us quite a bit.
And there's always going to be the maintenance aspect of it as well. When
absolutely, you want to get into a system, you need to take the insulation off. And what's a really interesting thing that's we're seeing more of is as we explore deeper into the underbellies of Toronto, because there's a lot of underground systems, we're finding that although the systems were insulated maybe in the past, they would negate things like maybe valves or strainers or just components within the system they wouldn't insulate because they want to have access to. Well, they're realizing all the energy loss is happening in those pieces that they left out. So even though we're not even dealing with taking off anything old or retrofitting a system, we're actually just going in and finishing the job we should have done in the first place, or that they should have, you know, purchased that insulation to be done in the first place. We're going and finishing those things that might be 10, 15, or even 20 years old. So that's an interesting market that's kind of creeped up for us as insulators in the province as well.
And sometimes you have those silly pipe fitters. They're like really ignorant, and then they go and step on the insulation, then they step on it again. And they step on it again.
If I'm going to call anybody out for doing that, and I will call out someone for doing that, to be honest with you, it tends to be the maintenance or service or the technicians or whatever you want to call them, but usually the people that work or run the facility after the work is done. You know what I mean? So if I'm doing work for, say, Molson's or like a brewery or something like that, it's the workers of that facility after we finish that tend to then feel comfortable to step all over our work. And then all they do is destroy it, and then we have to come back and fix it anyways.
It's like, thank you for, the job security. High five.
Absolutely.
No, it must be a bit of a piss off though. Like it makes me mad when I see it, and that's not even my profession. So.
Well, it doesn't hold up very well, right? So it's designed to have dead air, and I can get into the science of it, but we'll leave it alone. But as soon as you compress or destroy those air pockets to that, slow down the transfer of energy, it destroys the whole system, and then it looks horrible. Like it looks like it was just kicked, because it is usually softer in its material and look, and usually it's pretty clean looking, whether it's a white or a aluminum finish. It has a nice look to it. So once it gets junked up, it's going to happen over time, but not in the first week. Like,
yeah, the joys of working with construction workers. It's like there's some stereotypes, and most of them, they're not true. But then every now and then you come across a couple guys or a couple women as well that, yeah, okay, damn it, guys, stop it. You're just perpetuating that stereotype. Go away. Go away.
Oh, stereotype in construction? No, that's not a thing.
No, not at all. Okay, so when we're talking, this is like always the most awkward question I have to ask people, but it's what people want to know, and it's wages. Like, what could one make being an insulator? And I know there's going to be a lot of variance, because obviously someone in Ontario is going to be making a different wage than someone in Alberta, but could you kind of give people an idea?
Yeah, I mean, we're very proud of this. I think that an insulator in the province of Ontario, I think once they get their ticket, could easily make between 75,000 to 100,000. Really, not that difficult to get there, and that wouldn't be anywhere in the province. One thing its majority of the province is union for insulating. There's not a lot of non-union insulators out there, and the discrepancy between the wages is pretty large, but the way it works out is there's tons of training and resources that go into the union sector. So that is a big difference maker. There is an educational system that's followed and adhered to, and it had to be adhered to. So that is a big difference. And the type of systems you're working on are most often completely different. So, it's a very comfortable wage point by trade standards. We rank amongst all the other trades for that matter. No real discrepancy in that. And it doesn't matter where you work in the province either. I mean, that's pretty much rural, like living in rural Eastern Ontario. It's a very similar wage. You make a very similar wages if you work downtown Toronto. That's
pretty awesome.
We're very fortunate that way. Like, again, I often say that I didn't pick this trade. The trade picked me in some roundabout way. And I am very grateful for that. Always have been. I still joke today. Like, if someone told me of all the construction trades and go ahead and pick one, would I even still pick insulator? I'd probably pick number 2. And the only reason I say that is because I think elevator technicians are really cool trades, because they have so many backgrounds behind them. Like when they tie in pneumatics and electrical and all this other stuff, I think it's really cool. So I've always been intrigued by that once I learned about it, but not intrigued enough to ever change. So I guess, I don't know, maybe it's like a 1A, 1B thing.
Oh, and that's the whole point of the show too, is that you got to have the plan A, plan B, plan C. Like, it's just the way the economy is now, that you got to have other plans and other interests.
Well, I think the world's definitely changed that one thing the rest of your life is certainly not a conversation anymore. I just don't see it. I think there's some people that land in some unique environments where maybe it goes that way. But I mean, right away, people shoot to a teacher. So a teacher spends all their time in education, they get educated, then they become educators. So that becomes their world. But, I interviewed a teacher on one of my other podcasts that was a volunteer coordinator for the Toronto International Film Festival. So left being a teacher, went a completely different industry. Even that, I don't think, is such a clear-cut thing anymore. I don't know. And I wonder, was it ever really clear-cut? Mm-hmm. I think this day and age, we have so many opportunities to multitask. And I also believe our generation's really good at it, and the generation behind us is even better. So I don't know if we'll ever be satisfied just doing one thing either.
What do you love about your job?
I don't know. No, what do I love about my job? You know what? I've had so many different opportunities that came from a trades ticket. I almost think that's what I love the most. The ability to grow. It's often overlooked. I kind of stated before that the pathway you get after your ticket is really amazing. The opportunities to be a team player on so many different levels while having a trade background, whether it be an insulator or somebody else, that interaction with the multitude of trades to complete a task, whether it's building a new structure for people to see or renovating, repairing, or maintaining stuff so it works properly, like you come with this big sense of accomplishment and you get to be a definite cog in the wheel to turn that forward. I really appreciate that. You know, there are days at certain elements of your job or your trade or whatever you're doing, crawling in some deep, dark hole where as you shine light, all of a sudden the walls start to move and you realize that's bugs and cockroaches and all kinds of cool stuff that you're about to crawl into. Those are tough days. But when you start thinking about the world that can come from being successful in that trade and the opportunities that start rolling down from it, whether it's getting into supervision, getting into working with your union, getting into estimating, getting into opening your own company, like, you know, there are so many places your trade ticket can take you. I think that sometimes needs to be reminded. You need to keep that in your head to stay motivated on the tougher days. And so that was always a thing for me, that because I didn't fall, you know, I didn't go hunting for the trade. I fell into the trade, right? So maybe my motivators were different, but that certainly was the one for me. And when I look back on my path, I had done lots of different things over time through my trade. So I guess it obviously was a motivator that worked.
What would you say are some of the challenges that you run into on the job? Like if someone wasn't, we've kind of already spoken to this. Like you said, there's working at heights and you got to be comfortable with small spaces. But is there anything else you can think of off the top of your head that would make someone a bad fit for this career?
There's repetition. A lot of repetition, although it doesn't seem like it. You know, insulation is going over top of a pipe and often it's going on at 3 or 4 feet at a time. So there is some repetition. Depending on the environment, like if you're working in like a new hospital or a new, you know, old age home or school, a lot of the rooms and layouts look the same and kind of are the same. So the system might get a little repetitive. Heights, yes, is a thing. You know, there's weather, there's outside, the typical construction things that people have to think about, that, you know, you are going to get dirty, you are going to have to work, you're going to break a sweat. Those types of things are there, but that hopefully those invigorate you and not tire you or, you know, scare you. You are going to have to think outside of the box, but yet not forget what was inside the box, if that makes any sense. Like I kind of use the phrase innovating on a foundation is something that needs to be done often, that you know what has to be done, why it has to be done. Then you're presented with a problem like a pipe not going through the wall straight, or some tracing that someone decided to spiral instead of run straight, or, you know, something weird. And you have to now innovate on top of what you have to accomplish. So if that kind of stuff starts to get out of your realm of comfort, that you prefer just following the mundane, or you don't want to have to be creative, you know, that can definitely be a challenge. Our trade comes with a lot of creativity and there's a bit of an artistic flair to it. So you have to have that, maybe a little bit of OCD to what you do to want it to look good, with a sense of leaving something behind that people will like to see. That can be hard for some people. They prefer to have their work just done and forgotten about. I think insulators actually have a little bit harder time with doing your work and leaving it forgotten, because everyone does see it. Especially when they do like a lot of these mechanical rooms now in universities and hospitals and stuff, where they're all glass windowed. So the public walks by the mechanical room to see inside the building. I don't know what brought this on, but I guess natural light. But and then you look inside and there's all the insulation systems, where inside the building, we were like 30 feet from the ground trying to insulate them, yet outside they're eye level. So you better have the idea to work at heights and put your time in. So those things can be big drawbacks if those things don't strike as marks for you that you enjoy or at least can tolerate. Those things that are, you know, things you don't look for in a job, then they definitely won't fit you as an insulator.
Would you say this job has a good work-life balance? Like say you had a family, or you have someone sick in the family you're taking care of? I
feel most trades have a comfort level that once you've completed your apprenticeship and you have your trade ticket, and I don't mean to asterisk that point, but I do think it is a point. It's kind of like university. Like if you had to leave university to go take care of a family member or do something in life, like that kind of stops it. And apprenticeship's the same thing. Like if you have to stop your apprenticeship, it does stop it. But aside from that, upon the completion point of it into the trade, it does have plenty of mechanisms to allow tons of balance. The one thing I find very fortunate about being in my role with the union in that, and not just my role, but being in the union, is we have we have it on our paycheck, our vacation. And, if we want to take a week or two off, we just book it with our employer, have our week or two off, and come back to work. And, they're not paying you while you're away, but you were getting it on your check anyhow. So life's pretty good. So that's a nice balance. In Ontario, the average work week is still 36 hours. So that quality of life I talked about earlier, you're getting that on a 36-hour paycheck. So 36 hours in a week is still in comparison with working like a government job where people consider the hours cushy, where we're getting to do that as well. I think we just have to work maybe, I don't want to say harder, but maybe perceptually harder to get that 36 in. So
that's crazy. Like I've been looking for a 40-hour job or 40 hours a week here and home, and it's really difficult to, because actually the mentality here is kind of that you work 50-60-hour weeks, and that's kind of the norm in construction in Alberta. It's changed definitely with the recession that people don't want to pay the overtime anymore, so it's not happening as much, but definitely
again, as an insulator trade, we're unique. I'm not saying we're better or worse than anybody, but I just think we get to ride these challenges in a different way, simply due to the timing of how a construction project works. So the implications to us on a recession, I'm not saying it's any less or any more, but it just comes in a different fashion for us, where we could still be ending off projects while other trades are experiencing a lull, and all of a sudden maybe there's a boost in the economy or something breaks. Those things happen for the other trades after they sat at a lull, and meanwhile, we're riding through finishing off projects. So we get a smaller window of what was a lull for other groups, which allow a bit of an uptick sometimes. So we kind of, like I said, we ride the wave a little bit differently. Like, for a better analogy, maybe we're on the back end of the wave. It's not as exciting. It certainly isn't as fast, but at the end of it, it's a smaller up and down for us. And that tends to be how we end up going through these things. So I can think back to like 2008 was the real big crisis that happened, like the big recession that happened internationally there. And although it affected us, I certainly don't feel it crunched us as hard as maybe some of the other trades, because again, we were finishing off projects, or when people were taking on maintenance work and doing that scope of work, like, again, our work had us in there taking those things off. So I'm not saying we were immune to it. We were certainly affected, but when I look at in comparison to some of the other trades, I don't feel we were hit the same way.
That sounds pretty good. Apparently I picked the wrong trade. Well,
I think someone...
we're definitely in a lull.
And we're not immune to it. There are times, like back in the 90s when the recession hit Ontario the way it did, that crushed all trades, including us. Like we were definitely hurting very, very bad for a long time. The problem is when the lull gets big enough to hit all trades and hits us hard like everyone else, it'll take us a lot longer to get back up, because the building of that new system, or whatever the case may be, we got to wait till a certain stage of the game before we get to the site, right? Like, you guys get on site in early days. You're setting the site up, you're running the mains and the lines. We don't have to get there and insulate those things till they're tested and ready to go for us to do that. So how long could you be on a site before a system is tested and operational before we show up to insulate? It could be weeks to months.
Yeah, true that. It just kind of got to go with the flow, unfortunately, when it comes to the trade. Sometimes certain sectors get slow and other sectors get busy.
As an apprenticeship instructor, I spent a long time teaching apprentices and trying to share with them some words of wisdom that were given to me. And, apprentices, the best words of advice I've ever heard. If you're a first-year apprentice, okay, there's not much you can do there. But as soon as you become a second-year apprentice and you got a pay raise, well, don't live off that pay raise. Stay living your life as if you're still a first year. Take that pay difference, if it's $50 or $100 a week, whatever it is, stick it in the bank for the whole year. Then the next year, or whatever your next upgrade is, and you go to a third year, live like you're a second year. And if you play that banking system through your apprenticeship, like, that's a down payment to a house or more, or it's a vehicle bought outright, or it could be all kinds of intangibles that you will need as you get to the end of your apprenticeship that you'll be so grateful you did. And it doesn't hurt you, because while you're making your first year wage, you obviously are doing all right. When you make your second year wage, you're still doing fine. So as you're going through that progress, you're just allowing a little bit of a stall for yourself. And by doing that, you're creating a really strong economical foundation for yourself. And I can't stress that enough to anybody. And, if anyone listening is an apprentice, or someone who's an apprentice or is going to be one, the sooner you can try to practice that, do it. And I don't care whether you have a family or you have a situation where you need every cent. I get that. But the practice of teaching construction workers to save is a really good practice, because there are times like you're talking about right now where, you need a cushion, and it might not last you forever, but you'll certainly be grateful you had something.
Oh, yeah. I'm so grateful for the cushion that I had going into having my daughter, because that cushion has literally lasted us till now, and we're going on to her second year birthday.
Wow.
And we've been comfortable till now. And now I'm like, okay, I really got to get this whole looking for a job thing down.
Well, the point will always
it's got to happen.
Yeah, the point always comes on everybody, I think. But definitely in the trades, you earn well. You have the potential to earn very well. But there's also that mindset of being financially responsible. And so that is something that I know is being taken up with a lot of apprenticeship systems, that they're actually trying to get into more financial training for apprentices, to talk about, hey, you're going to make a good wage. Let's teach you to be smart with it, because you could be 22 years old and a journey person making maybe six figures. That sounds like a recipe for disaster if someone hasn't invested some time on how to run a household or to understand your banking system. Or there are people that are young that are still handing their paychecks to their parents, right? That can happen. So that skill needs to be way more communicated. And if anyone from the education system Ontario is listening to this, please put all that financial planning stuff back in high school, like how to run a bank account.
Yeah, definitely.
Those things are huge. So
the problem is, I think we had it in high school. I know we had it in high school in our grade 9 class. I think it was called Career and Life Management, but
yes.
Yay! Calm, stay calm. Yeah.
And they taught you how to write a check.
But it's like they teach it to you, but unfortunately sometimes when you're younger, information goes in one ear and out the other, because I know we all took the course, but some of us did a better job of actually listening to the advice versus others. They need to teach it in grade 12, I think, not grade 9. I think grade 9 they used to teach it at that age, because maybe more people dropped out of high school and they're like, let's get it into them before they drop out. But I think more people are sticking around. There's
some interesting groups I've bumped into. The Center for Experiential Learning is a group in Ontario, and their conversation is about how to help educate in a hands-on way for traditional courses. And it was really neat, because I was at an event recently where they had this board up, and the students were encouraged to put little sticker dots on the traditional courses that they take that they would love to see more experiential learning on. And I'm watching this booth, and I thought to myself, do they even know what experiential learning really truly is? Because the booth was pretty simplistic in its nature. So I stood back and watched, and this little billboard thing filled up incredibly fast, and these kids knew exactly what it was. And I was within earshot of listening to them, and they were coming up with scenarios or things you could do in those classes that would be experiential, and that's why they were putting their stickers on. And they were having this conversation with each other. They weren't having it with any adult. And these kids were grades 7 through 9 doing this. And I was blown away. And I was like, wow. So they already catch on to the idea that school's great, but they could do more with it. And I'm like, that's amazing. Because I don't think when I was between grade 7 and 9, I was thinking about that. But it was very impressive to see where their mindset was.
Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast and why you decided to start it?
Accidental Apprentice podcast. Accidental Apprentice was a talk I was giving very early on in my days of being an instructor. About my just nuanced story of falling into a skilled trade. Is a longer winded version of it, but it was definitely a conversation about not knowing what to do, feeling like you had let everybody else down on what they expected of you or what the world said you should do. And so I try to bridge that gap that, you can be comfortable doing a lot of things. Don't get hung up on what other people think. That was kind of the concept behind it. As time's progressed, I've got to network and know a lot of people across the province and outside of the province who have different jobs and careers, and all kind of had similar stories where they went these different ways. And something I really hold true in my heart is that everyone's story is special, no matter what it is, no matter how plain and simple you think it is. Everyone's story is special and unique. And I really think everyone should get a chance to share their story. In this day and age, it isn't the world's most complicated thing to put a podcast together. And I thought, there's some value in having everyone share their stories, not just the big celebrities and hoo-haws and people that have the big followings. The average person has a great story, and there's a lot to learn from it. And I think the vast majority would learn a lot more from the average story because it's more relatable in a lot of cases. And whether they take that average story and do something bigger with the motivation behind it, what have you. But where is that? And I just thought it was something that would work very well. And really, the conversation in Ontario has gotten really big about skilled trades and different pathways and the idea of how to consider things that were maybe less than traditional. So the idea of odd jobs explored kind of just came out of that network and just a chance to share my network. The target audience I got asked before, and I'm like, I don't know, anyone with ears. Because people make career changes at any point in their life. And I would love to hear about some of the different jobs that are out there. I talk about liking elevator device mechanic or elevator mechanic. I could interview someone later that probably might ruin that or make it better, one or the other. Who knows? But there's definitely stories and, humility that can be shared to help people just feel less stressed. Because I start looking at kids that are 16 to 20 and they seem to have the weight of the world on their shoulders with the expectations of these big decisions they have to make. And meanwhile, for most of us, stuff doesn't get figured out till you're like 30 or 40. And even then you can question what you've really figured out.
I was going to say, I kind of feel like that way. I'm in my mid-30s now, so I don't know. It's not knowing what you want to do, and it's very relatable, that's for sure. And the few episodes I've listened to, I've really enjoyed.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're just getting it off the ground. I've got a bunch recorded, but it's time to get in that post-production thing. And you and I were talking about that, how that can take up a lot of time when you really get that OCD of a tradesperson in there.
So where can people find you out in the interweb world if they want to find your show or get in contact with you? Yeah,
well, I've got it posted up through Anchor right now because I haven't taken the time to make a webpage. Whether that's just being lazy or not, but I guess so. Instagram, it's at Accidental Apprentice. Twitter, it's at Accidental APPR1. Don't ask Twitter, right? Getting in the game in 2018, sometimes you'd be lucky you got half of it what you want it to be. So anyways, those are the two main sources for social. I'm going to put a webpage together. I think I started to get a little more interest in the podcast than maybe I anticipated out of the gate. So I'm going to have to change the mechanisms where I put it on. But if you want to find the podcast, it's on iTunes. It's on Pocket Cast, Anchor, like I said. They're all there. It's Anchor's pretty cool because when you put it on there, it'll just disperse it amongst many other podcatchers for you.
Nice. Is it on Google Play then?
No, that's the only one it's not on yet.
Oh, come on.
I know.
You gotta get to it.
Well, I think that's part of the, and I'm an Android guy, so that really bothers me actually. So that's where I think I'm going to have to bite the bullet and go ahead and put a web page together and just take up more time trying to consume a web page. But as Gary Vee says, what's 7 p.m. to 2 o'clock in the morning for, but your side hustle?
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been such a fun chat. I wish I could just go for another 3 hours, but...
Oh, no, we've been on for a long time. I really appreciate it. It's been so natural, and I love what you're doing. Please keep up the great work. You got a great podcast on your hands. You get some really cool guests, and as someone who has to drive around the province a lot, I appreciate having something quality to listen to, so please keep it up.
Yay! Thank you so much for saying that. It makes my day.
Thanks so much for joining us this week. If you would like to get in touch, feel free to find us on both Instagram and Twitter at CareerPod. Oh, and if you ever feel like leaving a review, we'd also love that.